Again, once the housing market and the suburbs normalized, the need arose for things to change, to be different, for individuality to spawn. Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the most prominent and influential architects of the 20th century. He not only developed a series of highly individualized styles over his career, he influenced the whole course of American architecture. Wright's houses developed more increasingly open plans, allowing stay-at-home moms of the 1950s to work in one area and keep an eye on the goings-ons in the other parts of the house at the same time. In other words, mom could work in the kitchen and see what the kids were doing in the living room. His plan also focused on nature, clean lines that brought out the beauty of nature without distracting from it. Finally, his homes were developed on a design he called Usonian that featured concrete slabs on a grade, creating interesting angles and simplified construction techniques. Art became less about recording a reality than in being its own reality. Pictures and paintings were not of something at the time, and were instead impressions of emotions or feelings. Artists such as Jackson Pollock challenged the aesthetic establishment and created the style of painting today known as abstract expressionism. Based in New York, abstract expressionism rejected both social realism and geometric abstraction, two dominant strains in American art in the 1930s. For abstract expressionists, the subject of the art was autobiographical and emerged from the sheer act of making a painting. Art was not about an experience, but was itself the experience. The individual became an imperative in the 1950s, disabusing people of the learned reality that government ruled all. The literature of the 1950s dealt with several themes. Primary among them was the power of the individual to control his or her own fate, and concern with conformity and the power of the government over the people. A 1952 work by Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, helps illustrate the point that it is people who control their own fate. A new group of writers called the Beatniks focused on the anti-establishment movement, promoting a message of rebelling against what society considers the norm. Were writers like John Kerouac, whose 1957 novel On the Road set the standard for beats to follow. Most educational happenings in the decade centered on the civil rights movement. However, some work in terms of educational techniques began to occur. In 1955, Rudolf Flesch published a groundbreaking work titled Why Johnny Can't Read. In it, he questions the move by the failing public school systems to abandon teaching phonics. Phonics is learning how a letter sounds and putting the sounds together to form words. Instead, society had moved towards whole word recognition. In other words, teaching kids the whole word and to memorize it. It took almost 20 years for Flesch to gain substantial acceptance by the public, but by the 1970s, reform had begun.